Lord Cthulhu, as you already know. I recently did a video, as you may or may not have already watched, on multi-classing. And it got me thinking more about giving tips on dungeon mastering. A lot of people wonder about that, like people who are mainly players. A lot of them wonder what it takes to be a DM, or what you have to do, what it takes to set up the world, what it takes to set up a dungeon. So I decided to do a quick video on that. There's probably a little more to it than what I'm going to cover here today, but I'll cover what I can. First of all, what you need is a Dungeon Master's Guide, a monster manual, and a player's handbook, arguably. Some people have told me you don't really need it, but it covers rules on gameplay and difficulty class and all that. A lot of it is gone over in the DM guide, but I do suggest strongly that you have all three. Basically, the Dungeon Master's job is to set up the entire world of wherever you're adventuring. You have to set up a base city where the players, maybe not even that, a place in the wilds, just somewhere for the players to start. You need to talk about the world and tell them anything they might know. You need to be able to answer any questions, and yeah, sometimes PCs do ask stupid questions, and just entertain them. It's not a big deal. If they continue to ask stupid questions, then you might want to think about cutting them from the game, because that's going to ruin the immersion factor. And immersion is very important, because like what you're trying to do is RP in this fantasy world, and you have to know that, or you have to feel like you're actually in that world. That's a big part of it, and a lot of that is a DM's job. And the way you can do this is by giving as many details as possible. First of all, talk about the weather, talk about the people, talk about the general feel, talk about what the towns or wilds look like, talk about what it sounds like. Everything you can possibly muster from your creative self, throw into this, because that's important. Second of all is the gameplay side of it. You know, you have the storyline side, which is a little more fun, and then you got the gameplay side. When you set up an adventure, you need a few things. One, a reason. This is part of storyline, but a reason why they're going there. So for example, if they're going to explore a mausoleum, you need something to draw them there. So let's say they saw a strange man wandering the cemetery, and they happen to see him wander into the mausoleum. There you go. There you have it. They could be attacked by undead that this strange man, who could be a necromancer, could have summoned. That's coming a little bit out of my campaign, which I'm going to talk about where my campaign is a little bit later to give you an idea of what you have to do. Other optional things you might need include a Dungeon Master screen. If you can find one, they have them on Amazon. That's the only place I've actually seen them. 4.0 has a DM screen, and I don't play 4.0, but I do have the 4.0 DM screen somewhere. I just use it to block like people from seeing, and so I'm thinking about just gluing 3.5 charts to it instead of trying to find the 3.5 DM screen. I'm just going to get some of the charts that are on it and super glue it to that, because it saves me a little money. Again, I got really excited about 4.0 when it came out. They were talking about like all these changes they made, but I didn't realize they were going to make every class under the same mechanic and just make it ruin the immersion factor and just make it all gameplay. But moving on to what we were talking about, you also need encounters. Encounters are important. There's the system they have set up is what they call the challenge rating system. So normally a challenge rating of 1 monster will correspond to a level 1 character. If you have a lot of characters, you're going to need more monsters of challenge rating 1, or you might want to, for example, if you want a boss monster, I have a massive party I'm trying to cut back of 12 people, and I put them up against like a challenge rating 5 monster. I found I still had to nerf it a bit because it had killed 2 of them. And you know, that's the challenging part behind it, is, you know, you're either going to have a whole lot of monsters, or you're going to have one strong one that's going to make it very easy for him to kill off members of the party. But regardless of that, it's important that you make it challenging, but not too hard. If it's overwhelmingly hard, the characters are going to get frustrated. If it's too easy, they're going to get bored. Unless you have a really good story to make up for it. I mean, because that's the most important part. And by the way, I just cleaned my room. That's why it looks even messier than it already was. Garbage days until Tuesday. But anyway, when it comes to creating a dungeon, you really do need a lot of creativity. Like, when it comes to creating a campaign, first of all, you need a familiar setting for them to go back to. Or even, maybe not even that, maybe you just need, if they're roaming characters, you just need them to know each other really well. But you need a reason why they're adventuring. That's one of the biggest things. If there's no reason for it, then the storyline is flawed. You absolutely need a reason why they're doing what they're doing. You can't just say, hey, you find yourself in front of a dungeon. Now, some people like that. This is a system called dungeon crawling. It's all combat. It's all about just facing encounter after encounter and just fighting off monsters. Personally, I can't stand it because that takes out, the game's called an RPG. They're making it just a G game. Anyway, it sort of kills the experience when you're dungeon crawling. Another thing you need is a DM. Sometimes you might have some trouble coming up with encounters, and as I mentioned before, the DM guide has a I'm getting dice. It's not what it looks like. The DM guide has generators, and you need a percent dice for that, and you also need a D10 to make up the one digit. If I can, there it is. And what you'll do is you'll grab the DM guide, which is of course buried and at the bottom of my book pile. Oh, there goes my melatonin. Anyway, you take the DM guide and you'll flip to the generator page, which I have marked. Wilderness encounters. There's charts for different there's charts for different areas. There's wilderness, cold mountains, temperate hills, temperate plains, warm forest, warm hills. It goes, a lot is important by weather because some creatures can't survive in cold weather, and some, vice versa, some can't survive in warm. Warm marshes. See, I like cold. Like, you'll find that in a lot of my campaigns. It's always cold or snowing, and I don't know why, I just like it. So what you'll do is you'll roll this. I rolled a 10 and a 4, which is 14. And you'd find the corresponding thing. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. This is by challenge rating. Here's one. So I rolled 14. 14 to 19 is 1d3 locust swarms. So you roll a 3-sided dice. Actually, this is a good time for me to tell you how to roll a 3-sided dice. They do have dice out there that have 1 through 3, then 1 through 3 again. But we don't all have those. I know I don't. So what you'll do is you'll take a d6, a 6-sided dice, you'll roll it, you'll divide by 2. I rolled a 2, so I got a 1. If you'd rolled a 1... No, I'm sorry, I did that wrong, actually. Wow. 1 through 3 would be 3, and 4 through 6 would be 3. So I got a 1, which is a 1. So it's 1 locust swarm, which is actually going to be pretty pathetic. It's not going to be a hard fight for my crew. Like, my group needs specialized fights because it's huge. It's 12 people, and I really do need to cut some out. And that's another thing I want to tell you about. You really want to... I'm sorry, everyone's going to want to play, and you're going to have to tell some people no. When your party gets up to 5 or 6, especially if you're a beginning DM, I suggest you stick with 4 or 5 people at the very most. If you can, go with 3, because it gets really hard to keep track of what everyone's doing, even with a grid. And it really gets on my nerves when when people get mad when you won't let them play, because I've had it happen to me before. I've explained to these people, you know, I'm sorry, our party's full, and at 12 people, you know, that's a lot. And they're like, why can't I play? You got something against me? I'm like, no. I just don't have enough space. I can't handle any more people in my party. But you have to be prepared to tell people no. And let's bridge that into yet another subject. When it comes to when you have your starting weapons and stuff like that, when characters want something special, prestige classes, blah blah blah, the DM is always right. Don't be afraid to say no, but also don't be a Nazi about it. Don't be like, no, you can't do that, and don't take absolute control. You got to give the characters some freedom, some creative freedom, but you also have to keep, because this is your storyline. Like, I'm working on a campaign right now. It's not the one I'm doing at my school. It's one that I've been working on for 6 years now, and I finally got it finished. every dungeon written out, every monster created, oh my god, it was 6 long years of work, and it's finally getting finished. And I am being very exclusive about who I let play, because I have the characters, and I know I said I don't like this, I normally don't. I have the characters somewhat planned in my head, but you know, I'm still giving them some creative freedom. But the only thing is, like, for example, I've got a rogue who is the eyes of the king in the city. I'll give you the beginning of the story. What happens is, there's a king, and he's accused of betraying his kingdom by making deals with devils. He didn't do anything like that, but I can't give away the big twist. But he gets basically court-martialed, and they decide he's going to be executed. Now his close-knit group doesn't want that to happen, obviously. The rogue is his eyes on the city. The mage is his court magician and advisor. The mage would be a sorcerer or a wizard. Fighter or barbarian would be his guardian, you know, his bodyguard. Druid and ranger would be the ones keeping an eye on the local wilderness. And those are the classes I need, but I'm trying to keep it loose, let the people create the characters themselves. Just, I don't want that one ruined. And that's what I'm saying about anything you might create. You will put a lot of work. You will be looking through these books. You'll be just doing so much work. If you're a good DM, you will do hours of work to make a good dungeon. I've actually created a dungeon in 15 minutes that came out really good, because I used to have really good players, but they don't play anymore because they're too busy. Too busy for D&D. My butt. Anyway, you will put a lot of work into this, and you'll make sure it's balanced, and you do not want the PCs ruining that. And that's why I say sometimes you have to say no. They'll say, hey, can I have... Because sometimes you let the PCs look at the DM guide, because there's some useful stuff in there for players, but some of the stuff is like items and what it costs to create certain items. And like, I had one character who wanted to make a +5 dexterity sword or dagger, and like, he had the gold and everything, but I still had to say no. I limited him to +2. And again, I had good players, so he didn't make a big deal out of it. Just was kind of disappointed. But it's kind of tough sometimes, because they'll really get into why they should have it, and they say, okay, I've saved up this money for so long, but you don't want it ruining your game. If your game is too easy, it's going to stop being fun, and it's going to ruin your whole storyline. But anyway, I've gone way too far on a tangent here. First step, create a world. Second step, create monsters and encounters for each individual dungeon. Decide why they're going to be in that dungeon, and all that good stuff. Third, non-player characters. This really is more part of part one, but they're a part of the world. You need characters around to sort of shape up the world, and, you know, just keep it interesting. Any good story has interesting side characters as well as main characters. In my campaign, in my current campaign, it was the village chief. I'm actually going to give you a summation of what happened so far in my campaign, so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about at the end. But moving on, if you don't have ideas for encounters or NPCs or any of that, use the generators in the DM guide. I don't like that, because that sort of takes the customized side out of it, but sometimes I use them, but like, I won't use exactly what it says. I'll mold it a little bit, because it'll just give me an idea of what I might want to use. Another important thing is sometimes a DM will want pre-created characters, and your players need to understand, again, the DM is always right. If your weapon disappears into thin air for no reason at all, it happened. They can't do anything about it. A rock falls on your head, it's too big for you to dodge. Can't do anything about it. But a good DM will not do anything like that unless he or she, I'm sorry, I've been saying he a lot, I'm not, you know, he or she will have to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, DM is always right, and if you disobey the DM, you're basically going to get kicked out of the game. And nobody wants that to happen. So you just have to be a good DM, be reasonable, but also be strict. And I think that's about it on being a DM. There's more information in the DM guide. And, oh, there's another thing. Rewarding experience, that's also in the DM guide. But, yeah, just give the DM guide a run through to learn how to create the worlds and stuff. Give the give the monster manual a quick run through. Get familiar with the way their stats work. Get familiar with the way monsters work. And now I'm going to tell you what happened so far in my dungeon so you get an idea. My campaign, sorry. Basically, in this campaign, the whole team, or party, whatever you want to call it, is living in a small village. It's actually really small. It's in the middle of nowhere and just barely Antarctic conditions. It's basically kind of like, I liken the weather to Alaska. It's always cold. Even in the summer, it doesn't get above 65 degrees. And in the winter, the weather drops down into the negative hundreds. And that makes it very hard for them to grow crops there. And really where they get most of their food is from fishing. But other supplies such as plant supplies, stuff like that, are actually very hard to find around there. So what happened was, because of the cold weather, there weren't too many monster sightings. The only ones really spotted were cold elementals and stuff, and they tend to keep to themselves. And some druids, but the druids had sort of a peaceful pact with the local wilderness to keep them away from the village. And basically the trade caravans would go through there for safety. And not only that, there was a good concentration of magic users in this village, so they were able to create seals and spells and stuff to help the trade caravans get through the more dangerous areas, keep devils and fiends away. Basically, in the timeline of the story takes place right after this massive war. Not just a war between men and elves and stuff, but a war between gods. And it almost tore reality apart. Like literally, it almost just tore everything we know, the material plane, to shreds. So after 100 years of just war, one of the gods, Bahamut, the god of good dragons, and Tiamat, the goddess of evil dragons, I believe it's goddess, I can't really remember, had a pact, and they decided that they weren't going to fight anymore. Tiamat would get Kania, which is the cold layer of Bator, but Bahamut would get one of the rings of paradise. This was again from other gods too, trying to keep them from fighting, trying to keep them happy, because if they fought, they were two very powerful gods. They could tear apart the entire material plane, as well as some of the astral planes and outer elemental planes and stuff. And basically, we're at a time of peace right now. There was a lot of blending between the realms of the dead and the realms of the living, because people were using necromancy way too much to create soldiers and stuff. So what if that happened? Basically, in my world, you have the plane of the dead. In between is sort of a hallway, which is the astral plane. It's not built like a hallway. It's like basically like it is in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's a plane behind ours, but it's basically the level in between the realm of the dead and the realm of the living. People like to go there because then you can spot what's going on in both worlds, but it's difficult because you could get stuck there. But anyway, if the two planes had clashed, it's a coming together of opposites. The whole universe would have basically been torn apart. Now, outside of those two planes is the Feywild, which is purely magic, and magic in this universe is required to create life. So that place is just like insane with life. There's the material of that dimension, the matter, isn't that powerful, so it's constantly being twisted and changed by magic. And the Feywild is mentioned in the actual books. This is my version of it, my take. It's almost pure magic. The matter there isn't very stable. On the other side, you have a plane that I actually haven't come up with a name before yet. It's pure material with maybe a slight tinge of magic to keep it together, but it's immovable by magic. Any life that goes there begins to entropize. Like all of your energy, matter, and life begins to become more and more, more and more unstable until you're just torn apart and you cease to exist. Our plane is a balance of those two things, and it's between those two worlds that it was able to come to be. Basically, like I said, if the material plane and the plane of the dead had crashed, it would have been bad, but if those two planes had clashed, the entire universe would just be gone. Everything. There would be nothing left. So it was very important to keep Tiamat and Bahamut away from each other and keep them happy. And while they're over there, as he raises his hands, a bunch of ghouls jump out of the ground and just try to grapple everybody. The others rush over to help, and they manage to defeat the ghouls. I hate Final Fantasy VII, and I have no idea why I just did that. Wow. Anyway, more importantly, they enter the mausoleum and find this massive network of tunnels and caves, and they realize something very strange is going on here. Someone's not only playing with necromancy, which basically the gods banned, but there's new mausoleums popping up, all kinds of weird stuff happening, so nobody really knows what's going on. So they decide to search it. The first thing they see behind not only the gate, and there's a door after that, what they see through that door is piles of hay, waste, and blah blah blah, and a massive being standing there. The smell of rotting flesh too. So they walk in and try to reason with this being, who is a zombified minotaur. The minotaur says, I have to guard this place. So our bard, who came from a small town where he was basically stealing everything he could and realized it was too easy, it's kind of like a game to him, so he came to this town, basically keeps him distracted with comedy. It's telling him jokes and stuff, and outside a game everybody's laughing because the stuff he's saying is just ridiculous. But the rogue manages to sneak through the shadows and get behind the minotaur and stab him in the back. It doesn't kill him, obviously. A zombie minotaur is very powerful, but it gets him distracted long enough for everybody to gain initiative and even an attack of opportunity from one person. So they manage to defeat the minotaur. On him they find one key. So they travel through the dungeon. It's pretty blank. They hear noises from underneath the floorboards, like creatures pounding at the floor trying to get out, which is pretty scary. Anyway, I thought it was scary. They find a key, or they find a door that's locked. They put the key in and it won't open. So then they realize there's another keyhole there. So they need 2 keys. So searching the rest of the dungeon, they fight a few other creatures, some zombies, some ghouls, and they find a study of some kind. It's there's a desk, a shelf of books. All it has is really journals on it. And inside the desk drawer, there's a note. Now you can buy miniatures and booster packs or sets. A lot of them come with they have a separate game for the miniatures called the D&D miniatures game, and basically it's like a chess-based game. It has no RP elements to it. It's basically kind of like the fantasy version of Chainmail. I mean, the battle system isn't like Chainmail, obviously, because they abandoned that when 3.0 came out. But I think the miniatures game came out mainly with 3.5 and 4.0. But you know, when I buy it, I have a couple of maps for it. Maybe I'll show those in my next video when I show some more of my D&D stuff. And I know how it's played, but I don't like it personally, because, again, I am a huge storyline person. But see some of my miniatures. Green Dragon. Orc Barbarian. They're all plastic. I don't have any hand-painted ones as much as I would like to. I just don't have the steadiness of hand to paint a miniature, to be honest. Have a fighter. And you don't really need to use these as what they are. You could really get away with just using them as tokens. I have tokens somewhere too. It's like little round cardboard circles that represent monsters. That's another thing you could do instead of miniatures if you don't have miniatures. One of my favorites, the Bullet. You can guess what he does. He charges. Grillion. I don't know how it's pronounced. I'm not even going to lie. My absolute favorite, my Gargoyle. My rarest one I left standing over there. It's a vampire of some kind. This one came with a set too. Young Black Dragon. There's a lot more in here, as you can see, but I'm not going to go over what they all are. I'm just trying to give you an idea. Oh, this one's kind of funny, actually. I think it's a dwarf. I lost the card. He's missing an arm. I've actually used him as a character before. One-armed dwarf who causes trouble. But yeah, those are pretty much the miniatures. I really only use them as placeholders. Like, half the time I have to keep telling people that they're not what they look like, because I don't have that many, as much as I would love to have more. But you use the miniatures just to mark where things are. Remember which character is yours. Often I'll just have a cardboard circle with somebody's initial written on it. Makes it a lot easier. But yeah, oh, and another thing about the grid, you do 1 inch by 1 inch squares if you're using graph paper, and each square represents 5 feet. That's how the feet in the game work. But that's about it, really, when it comes to DMing. Just be creative, and the steps go as follows. Create a world, create a dungeon for people to be in, create a reason for the dungeon, create NPCs, and just make it interesting, have fun with it, act out the characters, just have fun with it. That's what the game's. It's a game. It's not about winning. This one actually isn't about winning. It's about having fun. But this has been Dark Lord Cthulhu. I hope you enjoyed this video.